Hi again, everyone. Welcome officially. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever it is you're tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. My name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am pleased to welcome you to today's live author reading of new nonfiction. We'll be hearing from Erin Foley reading from Where They Belong, A Journey from Orphanages to Loving Families, released on July 9th. Cristina Adams reading from Copycat, a fabulous and slightly naughty memoir of a life in fashion, released on September 17th, and Alan Cohen reading from Taxonomic Vignettes, released on October 6th. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be ordered on Atmosphere Press's website. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. I'm also going to put some links directly to each book in the chat for everybody. At the end of today's event, we will have time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, just go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. Please do stay muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to use the chat for any praise and comments as well. One last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Erin, Cristina, and Alan today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Erin Foley. Erin is an American with an international heart. After spending a portion of her childhood in Latin America, she served in Papua New Guinea and Australia with YWAM medical ships for 2 years. She currently lives in Southeast Asia, where she's been teaching and working with NGOs for nearly a decade. Erin is the author of Kapuna, How Love Transformed a Culture, which received the North American Book Award 2015 for Best Travel Nonfiction and the 2015 Idaho Author Awards first place in biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs. She studied art, photography, and journalism at Hillsdale College in Michigan, and her passions include teaching, inductive Bible studies, urban gardening, good coffee, wombats, family-based care, and, of course, books. Today we'll be hearing Erin read from, Where They Belong. With at least 80% of children in orphanages having living parents, a crucial question arises. Is the world facing an orphan problem or an orphanage problem? In Where They Belong, Erin explores this question through the story of Dale and Kathleen Jones and finds that children in communities thrive with family-based care rather than in orphanages and children's homes. Let's now welcome Erin.
Good morning from Southeast Asia. And real quick before I start my chapter, I just wanted to share that I worked in anti-trafficking and family-based care in Cambodia for nearly 10 years. So a lot of what I wrote about is actual lived experience and people that I know. So I'm going to be reading from the chapter called Cultural Abuse on page 200 of my book. Government authorities were shutting down an orphanage because the living conditions and reports of trauma were extreme. They called upon children and families to help process the youngest children and transition them into families. The orphanage operated for decades with little oversight or accountability, and they found later that the director was an alcoholic who went on regular drunken rampages. Eventually, a foreign journalist exposed the truth behind her bright muraled walls. CIF brought all the babies and toddlers into the office to sort out paperwork and decide which families would be suitable placements. Kathleen and Annie, the small staff at the time, juggled caring for the children while working through logistics. All of them were little girls dressed in cute and frilly outfits. However, when the tots needed diaper changes, it was a shocking revelation that half the children were boys. Even some of the older children turned out to be males dressed as females. Investigations showed the orphanage director preferred girls. Photos and sob stories of little girls raised more money from foreign donors. so the staff dressed them all as girls. Some former staff members stated they did this so the children would receive better care. But the director treated the girls much better, and the staff worried about the boys, so they hid them. The older children in the orphanage gave statements of brutal beatings, especially when the director was drunk. One child in particular was the strangest case of them all. At about 6 years old, he spoke baby talk in English and acted like a toddler. This is his story. Jacob was confused. Who were all these new people? One day, people in uniforms came. They rounded up the staff and children. He was in the orphanage when it happened. He usually lived in the house on the property. Mama Judy told him he was special, but he went to the orphanage during the day. However, he did not like the other children because they were different. They were Cambodian. He knew that from how Mama Judy talked about Cambodia, it was better to be like her than to be a Cambodian. He got better food in his own room. Although Mama Judy rarely talked to him, the staff pampered him. From his earliest memories, the faces of his birth parents faded. When he began to form and speak words, she would slap him. "No, Kamai, you speak English." Mama Judy never said so, but he knew she preferred the tiny children, the adorable ones. So Jacob tried to keep himself from growing. Curling himself into a tiny ball, he made statements like, "I'm small. Jacob is small." After the people took him away, they placed him in a family. They had children who all looked different. The family spoke English, but they also spoke Khmer. He despised hearing Khmer. He would scream and wail. He knew it was bad. Yet as the days went by, he began to see the family liked to speak both languages. No one ever got punished for it. He waited for a swift smack from the parents or a drunken rage, but nothing like that happened. They sat at a big table as a family, eating rice and curry. They laughed together. Sometimes the kids argued, but they always found a way to be friends again. He wanted friends. Jacob soaked in all of it. He was not special here. He was just one of them. He did not know how to feel about that. Sometimes he would grow angry and cry until his lungs gave out, but he never got in trouble. The lady would come to hold him and speak Khmer softly to him. If he pushed back, she talked to him in English. In either language, they were kind words. She would tell him all about family, how one day they would find the perfect mother and father for him. But he never asked about Mama Judy. He was afraid to ask. She could be scary. The longer he was away, the more he wanted to stay away. One week, she explained that he would stay part-time with another family. They were very kind too. He met them when they came to dinner sometimes. The Cambodian lady had older children, and Jacob liked the big boy. He was funny and played games. Jacob also realized he did not need to be small around them. They liked him the size that he was. They encouraged him to eat and grow. One day, the foreign lady took Jacob into a new home where the Cambodian lady and her son lived. Hesitant at first, he saw that there were no small kids there. Good, he could be special. They ate sitting on mats on the floor. Piles of rice with fish soup and cooked vegetables were the main meals, or grilled pork with a fried egg on top. They mostly spoke Khmer. He understood it well now, yet sometimes hearing it still made him rage. That's when the big boy would explain things in English to him. But again, he never got in trouble in this home. He had not been slapped or screamed at in months. So while he still feared it, his fear grew less. Sometimes he dreamed that Mama Judy found him. She would drag him back to his room and lock him there. In his dream, he had forgotten English. He could only speak Khmer. Mama Judy would scream in his face. She would call him scum for speaking that language. "Have I not taught you anything?" Her face contorted as she reached out to pinch him. He woke up crying. The kind Cambodian lady would sit next to him, the faint light from the hallway spilling into his room. She would pray for him softly until his heart stopped racing and he drifted back to sleep. "Mama Judy can't find you," she promised him. Yet for days after he dreamed of Mama Judy, he feared speaking Khmer. Finally, the lady explained that they had a forever family for him. Sorry. I wrote it and I still get emotional. He would have a mother and father to call his own. He trembled as they drove into the village. Would they like him? Would they want him to be small or to be a girl? Pulling up to a cleanly swept lawn with chickens strutting about, a couple and their daughter stood in their best clothes with another woman who had paperwork. They were his family. Before he could process any more internal fears, his mother embraced him. She smelled good, like lemongrass. Kneeling on the ground, with her cheek pressed against his head, he felt her warm tears. Then shyly, the girl approached him. She gave him an awkward greeting that he returned with equal awkwardness. Then handing him a teddy bear, she looked at her feet and said, "I picked this one just for you." Finally, he looked at the man who was his father. Those eyes reflected such warmth. He was a skinny man with a wide smile. He learned they were teachers. He had never been to school when he lived with Mama Judy. Soon the days turned into months. Jacob liked his sister. She was musical and sang all the time. His mother made the best food with just the right spice. But his father, he adored his father. Like a shadow, he followed every move the quiet man made. He was a gentle, soft-spoken man who knew so many wonderful things. He would show Jacob books and teach him how to ride a bicycle and walk with him to school every day, telling him all sorts of information along the way. Years later, Jacob heard the voice of the foreign lady with all the kids. He turned around to look at her, and his old enemy, fear, rose. His throat closed. She had been one of the people who took him away from Mama Judy. Was she here to take him away from his family? She spoke to him in English and he froze. Heart pounding, he understood her, but did not know if it was safe to answer. Maybe she would think he was bad and not take him if he did not speak English. Father and mother were there, but they seemed happy and at peace. Jacob slid behind his father, clutching his arm as if life depended on it. He could never leave father. Then the foreign lady's eyes softened, and she addressed him in Khmer. She asked him how he liked his family. Still afraid to answer, tears choked him as he responded feebly, "Please don't take me back to Phnom Penh. Please don't take me from my family." Realization dawned on her face. Very gently, she responded, "Of course I won't take you from your family. You like them very much, don't you? I'm only here to see if you are happy. Are you happy?" He believed her. Looking at his father's face, he saw his father trusted her. The floodgate opened and words of joy poured out. He told her about his school, the three-legged dog down the street, and his new clothes, exhausting every topic his young mind could conjure. She mostly listened and smiled. By the end of the day, he liked the lady. After she left, he climbed into the seat next to his father and rested his head on the man's side. This was his home. He never had to leave. The investigators discovered that the orphanage director had set Jacob aside as a child for herself. Most of the time, he lived in her private home, but she used the orphanage as a daycare. He isolated himself from the other children. It was clear he had significant trauma. The director taught him that being Cambodian was wrong, and he would be punished for speaking his native language. He was treated superior to the other children, yet not like their children. He was not sent to school and was so underdeveloped in his speech that it appeared he lacked interaction. Jacob's case was so extreme, the government was adamant they should place him in a Cambodian family, and his whereabouts and identity were kept secret so that the woman could not track him down. At the end of Kathleen's first visit to check on Jacob and his family, the boy earnestly looked in Kathleen's face and asked her to promise never to take him to Phnom Penh. He saw the capital city as an evil place where he endured a lot in his early years at the orphanage. Kathleen explained that she was thrilled to see him seek shelter behind his father. It is a natural sign that a child has bonded with a caregiver when they look to them for safety. He's big now and he's doing well. He struggles a bit in school, but that's natural with his delays in development due to neglect and language confusion. Kathleen referred to the orphanage director, who claimed him as her child and demanded they return him to her. If you love a child and intend to spend your life with them, you speak to them, you play with them and send them to school, and you do not put down their culture, it's their identity. Investigators found little about Jacob before his orphanage years, so children and family staff had to guess his age. Unfortunately, there was no documentation of him at the orphanage. What little documents existed of the children were handwritten notes ripped from a school notebook. They only knew his years of birth. We have no idea where he came from or who his family is. Kathleen asked a doctor to look at the teeth of one of the boys to guess his age based on his dental development. The orphanage had not followed laws or protocols, let alone common sense or professionalism. Kathleen said, "It is common for orphanages to destroy traces of these kids in their lives. As a result, even after 2010, many orphanages still have no biofields or documentation of the children in their care." While Mama Judy's orphanage was secular, a missionary orphanage director took children regularly without paperwork or proper government referral. "I do it for the Lord," she declared to Kathleen, "so I don't need documentation." Sadly, she is one of half a dozen people running orphanages or children's homes who I've heard say the same thing. "God told me," or "I do it for the Lord," is a common excuse for bypassing laws, disrespecting a culture, and not heeding what decades of research show as best practices for children.
Thank you so much,
You can
Erin.
continue.
No, thank you so much. Especially, I know even for things that you've written and gone over so many times, whether it's in editing or whatever stage,
Mhm.
it's really just a testament that it's still so um, impactful, really, in such an emotional way. So thank you so much for sharing that excerpt with us. Reading next today is Cristina Adams, who's reading for Victor Costa. Cristina is a Cuban-American writer and editor from Houston, Texas. She has an MA in creative writing poetry from New York University, and her work has appeared in Dickinson Review, Minetta Review, Arc Women in Death, an anthology, and Buffalo Press, among other publications. Thanks to a phone call mere weeks after her father passed away in 2020, Copycat is her first venture into nonfiction. When she's not writing, she likes to travel, read short story collections and murder mysteries, and practice yoga. She lives in Austin with her husband and Luna the dog. Today, we'll be hearing Cristina read from Copycat, which tells the remarkable journey of a boy whose fascination with the golden age of Hollywood ignited a lifelong passion for haute couture. This candid memoir not only traces Victor Costa's professional triumphs, but also navigates through his personal tribulations with humor and retrospection. Cristina, take it away. Oh, it looks like you might still be muted, Cristina. Here, the house.
Am I still muted? No, of
No,
course.
you're all good.
Of course I muted. Thank you for coming to hear us read. I want to give a special shout out to friends and family who are here and to the team at Atmosphere Press for all their great work through the publication process and beyond. This book is a memoir. I was hired to write it by Victor Costa, a former fashion designer from the east side of Houston, otherwise known as not the fancy side of Houston. He built a career around and became famous for copying couture designs and selling them for a fraction of the original price. Tonight, I'm reading from 3 different sections in the book that represent different time periods in his life and career. This first reading takes place during Mr. Costa's high school years in Houston, when he first began designing and making women's clothing, starting with a party dress for a family friend who attended St. Agnes High School. Halfway through freshman year, between Glee Club rehearsals and homework, I started designing and copying clothes. Word got out that I could sketch the dresses in vogue from memory. And before I could say, "Let me take your measurements," a gaggle of St. Agnes girls were knocking on my door. So I sketched designs, copies and originals, for free, and then took them to be cut and assembled by a woman named Miss Adamo. There were more talented and more affordable seamstresses like Honey, who made my Aunt Gloria's wedding dress. But if you were Italian, you usually went to Miss Adamo, the undisputed queen of dressmakers in Houston's Italian community. Don't get me wrong, she had decent dressmaking skills, but she was essentially a mechanic. All the dresses she made looked alike, with slight variations on the theme. For $100, which was a lot of money then, your daughter's wedding dress would end up looking like your next door neighbor's daughter's prom dress. That's what you got when you went to Miss Adamo, a straight up A-line dress with a few sparkles here and there, maybe a bit of lace if you were lucky. Solid construction, no imagination. Knowing the same fate awaited the dress I designed for my friend, I spent an afternoon with Miss Adamo explaining what it should look like. "This piece of lace is asymmetric, see?" I said, moving fabric panels around and arranging the lace on top at an angle. "It won't work if you float it on one of your usual patterns. It's not an A-line. You have to put it together like this, so it turns out like that." I pointed to my sketch. Her irritation was obvious, but I didn't care. I instructed and insisted, cajoled and railed. In the end, she made the dress I wanted, so I would go away and leave her in peace. It was the only time she accommodated me. My next sketch fell victim to her cookie cutter style, as did the next one and the one after that. That continued for several months, me spelling out in extravagant detail what to do and how to do it, only to have her produce the same tired garment over and over. Then one day, I delivered a design for a dress that called for lots of material in different colors. "What is that?" she said, pointing to my sketch with the kind of revulsion you'd reserve for a large, hairy insect. "These are layers of netted tulle, Miss Adamo," I said. "These are 7 layers. You start with this color and go all the way down. 7 layers, 7 colors. Here are all the swatches and the names of the stores where I bought them." On my way out the door, I heard her muttering to herself words like "complicated" and "ridiculous." So I wasn't surprised when my mother informed me later that day that the doyen of dressmaking wanted me to steer clear. "Victor, what is going on with Miss Adamo? She called me this afternoon very upset." "Mary, your son can't come here anymore. He causes too much trouble," my mother said. "He wants things his way, not the way I make them. He wants 7 layers of tulle. I don't have time for that. I make dresses. I charge $100, and that's all I do." My mother arched an eyebrow at me, hands on her hips. It was a pose that implied nasty consequences for the wrong action or answer. Anger rumbled around deep inside me. I wanted to shout my outrage down the street to the entire neighborhood in one long, thunderous roar. Instead, I suppressed myself by laughing. "Miss Adamo has a lot of nerve, Mama," I said. "She doesn't want to make anything except the dresses she always makes. Trouble only happens when I ask her to do something different and follow my design. But the girls keep going to her, so she doesn't change. She doesn't have to." "What are you going to do about it, Victor?" My mother crossed her arms, tapping a shoe on the concrete floor. Tack, 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 a move that signaled expectation. I thought about it for a minute. "I guess I'm going to stop asking Miss Adamo to make my designs," I said slowly. "I can sketch and sew, so I guess I'm going to make them myself." My mother nodded, the hint of a smile curling her lips. In that moment, I made up my mind. I was sick of settling for second best. If Miss Adamo could make money with her stale ideas, I could do better. My dresses would be spectacular. This second reading takes place in Paris at a time when he was working in New York for a man named Sidney Blauner, who owned and ran a really well-known women's wear manufacturing company called Susie Perrette. Mr. Costa's reputation as a couture copyist and designer was on the rise, and this was his first time at the Paris fashion shows. That first trip to the Paris shows was an eye-opener. Mr. Blauner invited a different group of buyers and fashion writers to join us every night for dinner. It was good business and, since Mr. Blauner also liked to eat, good food. I usually came down to the lobby early to indulge in people watching. Few places are better for observing the comings and goings of the beautiful and the well-to-do than the lobby of an exclusive hotel. One night, while I was waiting for Mr. Blauner, I spotted Barbara, Babe Paley, emerging from the elevator in a striking couture frock, trailed by her two daughters, no doubt off to a post-show dinner at La Serre or La Tour d'Argent. Mrs. Paley was quelque chose in those days, cosmopolitan socialite, perennial icon on the best-dressed list, and wife of CBS founder William S. Paley. She regularly appeared in gossip columns and style pages from New York to Los Angeles. I was admiring her Balenciaga outfit when she walked up to me. "Hello there, we've been seeing you here every night this week," she said, giving me an appraising look. "What are you doing in Paris?" "Well, my name is Victor Costa." I stood up, flustered. "I'm going to be a designer, and I love your Balenciaga." It made me sound ingenuous, like a character from It's a Wonderful Life, but it was the truth, wasn't it? I was there as a designer, and I planned to design the hell out of a new Susie Perrette line after this trip. Mrs. Paley smiled at me, practically patting me on the head as if I were a little boy. "It is a good one, isn't it?" she said, glancing down the length of her skirt, as if to confirm that, yes, it was a spectacular outfit. "I'm Mrs. Paley. Nice to meet you, Mr. Costa. Have a lovely evening, and best of luck with your designs." With a wave, she and her daughter swept out the door so quickly I didn't have a chance to say thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Blauner materialized next to me, and we watched Mrs. Paley's limousine drive off into the drizzly Paris night. "What are we waiting for? Let's go. We'll be late for our reservation." Mr. Blauner hustled us toward the line of taxis. "Who was that? I was too far away to see." "Nobody special," I said, smiling to myself. "Just another lady with fabulous taste and money to spend." We arrived at the restaurant a little damp, but on time. Mr. Blauner always dined at the finest, most see-and-be-seen places whenever he traveled, and this one was no different. Tasteful, warmly lit, and full of manicured, well-dressed men and women. As I sat down between the two Blauners, the missus leaned over me, giving her husband a sly look. "Sidney, you're never going to believe who's sitting at the next table," she whispered. "Babe Paley, the Babe Paley." "No kidding," he said. "Which one is she?" He turned around in his chair and half stood up, head swiveling back and forth for a better view. I focused on the menu in front of me. "You have the subtlety of a bull moose, Sidney," Mrs. Blauner sighed. "She's wearing the fur trim dress, and she's just as elegant as her pictures." As I lowered my menu in time to see Mr. Blauner zero in on Mrs. Paley, recognize her as the woman from the Ritz, and then turn back to me, his eyes narrowed. I gave a little shrug, as if to say, "I know more than you think I do," and reached for my water. Now he knew, too. The last reading draws from his years in Dallas, when Mr. Costa had already become famous around the country and was a favorite designer of debutantes and the charity gala set around Texas. At this point in the book, he lives in Dallas, but happens to be attending a special event in New York. One year, my friend Ann Keynes invited me to the Met Gala. A sharp-witted redhead whose soft-spoken demeanor fooled more than one cocky designer, Ann had exited a top post at Neiman Marcus after many years to be vice president at Saks Fifth Avenue. The night of the gala, as we waited in the receiving line to greet the event chairs, I saw Oscar de la Renta standing near the entrance, probably waiting for his wife. It was no secret that I copied his designs every chance I got. Oscar made exquisite clothes. I tweaked them a little, some might say not at all, and made them more affordable. Word was that my copies also tweaked his ego. That's how good they were. Anne and I inched our way toward the head of the line, celebrity spotting and admiring the lavish outfits. A Chanel here, a Valentino there, followed by Givenchy, Prada, Dior, Armani, and more. It was a spectacle of couture fantasy from all the great fashion houses. That's when I heard Oscar single me out in a voice loud enough to turn heads. "Victor," he said, "when are you going to start sending me royalties for copying my dresses?" If he wanted to embarrass me, he failed. The entire world knew I copied his clothes. There was no crime in that. I acknowledged his comment with a genial nod and prepared to move into the throng when Anne spoke up. "Want to know what I think, Oscar?" she trilled in her best cocktail party voice. "I think Victor's going to do that when you start paying royalties to Dior and Saint Laurent." It was one hell of a touche, punctuated by a few gasps and giggles among the guests in line behind us. Ever aware of appearances, Oscar laughed it off, as if it were friendly banter between fellow designers. I could not have dreamed up a better way to start the evening. Around that time, New York Times fashion critic Bernadine Morris, whom I'd known since my days in New York, came down to Dallas with fashion photographer Bill Cunningham to do a story on how things had gone for me since leaving New York and going out on my own. She wrote a very nice article that featured, among other things, a prominent sidebar about jackets. Bill lined up photos of very similar looking jackets designed by Saint Laurent, Oscar de la Renta, and me. The headline encouraged readers to match the jacket to the designer. I don't know if anyone ever wrote Bernadine with an answer, but people I knew who read the article told me they could not tell the difference between the Saint Laurent original, Oscar's copy of Saint Laurent, or my copy of Oscar. Therein lay the beauty of being, as John Fairchild, former publisher and editor of Women's Wear Daily, put it, the best copyist in the world. My jacket looked like its couture cousins, but sold for much less. I wondered how Oscar felt about that.
Thank you so much, Christina. I love that you covered those three different excerpts from the book. I feel like we got so much personality and so many facets. So that was great. Thank you so much. All right. So our final reader for today is Alan Cohen. Alan had his first poem published in the PTA newsletter at the age of 10. He graduated from Farmingdale High School, where he was poetry editor of The Bard, Vassar College with a BA in English, and UC at Davis Medical School. He was then a primary care physician, teacher, and chief of primary care at the VA. He has over the years had letters to the editor in Poetry and the New Yorker and articles in the American and New England Journals of Medicine, and has had 182 poems published in 90 venues over the past 3 years. He's been happily married to Anita for 44 years, and they've lived in Eugene, Oregon these past 14. Taxonomic Vignettes offers vibrant life stories intertwined with deep exploration of friendships, nature, and evolution. Comprised primarily of longer poems with shorter, lighter ones sprinkled throughout, this collection delves into crucial life conflicts and trajectories. We'll hear more now from Alan himself.
Okay. I am reading from Taxonomic Vignettes, which is a book of poems about people. The cover is by my wife, Anita, as are all three of the books that I've published have covers by Anita. The poems are not really narrative. They're sort of summative. What I mean by that is that they're comments about experience. First is called Therapist. 1. Of course, I can see now how he must have looked to others. Short, fat, arrogant, pushy, bourgeois. The kind of Jew I myself left Long Island to escape. Connected, grasping, building a life by force of will, unable to hold it together. But that was not the man I knew. That man was forthright, intrepid, idealistic, altruistic, masterful, an egotist, but swashbuckling and fearless. We wrestled, we fought about what life was for, how much one could give up, change, and still remain himself, about how to deal with pain and inability to get a self to cohere, about desire and its satisfaction, about what is just and reasonable, about how to live in society. Yes, he was crass and infuriating, stubborn and bombastic, but he respected the child I was, the adolescent I became, the man I'd one day be, and he saved me. 2. He violated every code and standard, treated my mother, brother, sister, and me, not as a group, but one at a time, and met with us socially at restaurants, at home, split cases of wine from Sherry Liebman with my parents, helped me buy an engagement ring. I will never know precisely what his relationship was with my mother or how he felt about me, nor does that, in retrospect, seem to matter. I did ask, but never insisted, never required lies or explanations. Thought, in fact, he had shared too much, felt he had a right to privacy. That served me, us. 3, we knew he was divorced, had 4 children, was dragged back to court repeatedly for amendments to the divorce decree, was proud of his children, was lonely, finally found a new partner, an aspiring actress, someone we got to know quite well, maybe better than he did, who turned to us for advice and support both before his death and after. We knew that he taught at Albert Einstein, that he spoke German, had studied in Europe, was a Freudian, embraced psychoanalysis, saw each of us for an hour 3 times a week, was usually conventionally silent, opinionless, as we artfully urged, imparted thoughts and fears, and especially dreams, but would at times break ranks, intervene, pontificate, provide interpretations, summaries, which rarely rang entirely true, in an impenetrable, sanctioned idiom, portentous, rigid, improbable. 4, I spent the bulk of my childhood helpless and threatened, in my private city under bombardment, in a personal concentration camp of the imagination, anticipating enemies, ogres, blast, fire, rough hands, a violent end. My mind was tuned to the wrong station, miscalibrated, not suited to this world, needy, deserted, starved for love, affection, relief from fear. No one's fault, born defective. My parents supportive, also helpless, anxious to help. He said he was taking risks, but did it with confidence. It was as if he spoke the program language of my mind, rebooted, remapped it, replaced the programming flaws with the software that had been intended, needed, dissected away the apocalyptic, gothic imagery. It took, it seemed, forever, but once he'd intervened, the transition proceeded on its own, year after year, until one day I found myself free and open, transported from hell all the way here. 5, any service can be bought, but the quality of any service is always a gift. His care, rare, was the best gift I ever got. Without the least loss of my earliest self, I was put back right. Never spent a day in hospital, never took a single pill. I'd call it magic, fiction, if I had not been there. What he did, not evidence-based, conventional, or politically correct, a mercy that he was not stopped, restrained. I used to think that it could only have come from love, for me or us, or anyway, rightness. Though looked at another way, he did what he did because he had to, and it was in no way remarkable. Either way, he'd attained his condition of fire moment, to which one can only rise once, and which, to my mind, justified his life, amplified it, reset its margins, and if there is one, and he wished it, admission to heaven. This man, at the peak of his powers, giving all he had learned away to some random family, perhaps won forgiveness for whatever in his life he'd done or was to do poorly, falter, failing, watching slip away for just us, with strong arms and an open heart, in the sunlight, undismayed, shining, mending, making. The next poem is called Warning Shot, and this one is somewhat more narrative. When he awakens, his heart is pounding. He's lived with this heart for 70 years, and it's never pounded like this before. It's always beat, never pounded. whatever the emotion or provocation. Not even regular, and the stuttering, in contrast to the strong, staunch, slow, steady beat, is a sentence, or the breaking of one, a prophecy, a sign, time short, limitations ahead. He'd been so proud of his regular heartbeat, so secure in it. Calls the doctor's office, offered an appointment next day at 10, checks with his wife. She's been unwantedly quiet, mortality magnifying stealth and threat, dwarfing words, feeding and hiding their agitation. She nods and he accepts, still wondering if he should have insisted. He could be dead by tomorrow. But then, once off the phone, he converts. Pulse steady again. Wants to go sit in the sun, meditate. But it's 38 degrees out and raining, so he settles for a settee in the library. And settled, he sees an image, himself, with Sharon in midair. Below him, atom, molecule, cell, heart. Above, neighborhood, community, state, country. The column swaying, and though threatening to collapse, still upright. Next morning, in the office, exam and EKG both normal. Heartbeat, once more percussive and steady as a pile driver. He's reestablished on the earth. Perhaps he thinks, not 2 years ahead, but 20. Not reborn, not even rejuvenated, but reintegrated, alive enough, again, to contemplate harness and happiness. And the last poem is called Attachment. The first time I kissed a girl I loved, I was 12 and swamped by a hurricane of feeling I couldn't process or fathom, which was wonderful and terrible. But what I didn't know was that I was kissing, and in kissing helping to create a shadow, someone just then ceasing to exist. Solid as she was in my arms, she, I see now, realized, kissing me, she hated everything I was. It was the early 60s, early May, lilacs and crabapples and azaleas, all drenched in blossom, sunny and breezy, heady scents on the air. I just turned 12 the day before, and she had come to my party. Her gift, words, a life of Schweitzer, a card, love Linda, and I trusted words, had wild hopes of them. She'd been named best French student at school, led cheers, sang soprano in choir, had a full frank mouth and deep blue, sparkling eyes, probably no more idea yet than I did she was going to leave all that behind. I conjured words, conjured that birthday night, what I felt, what I yearned for, into a note that I gave her next afternoon at Joan's party, 5 houses from mine, round the corner, down the street, everything otherwise the same, the sunlight, the streamers, the crowd, the outdoor grill hamburgers, hot dogs, roast beef, beans, everything except what had passed between us, and that made the sky so intense, my chest, my arms so charged and watery, it was hard to eat, to play parlor games, hard to breathe. By then, we'd had lots of parties, spin the bottle, truth or consequences, pecking kisses, sweet ones, but to be in a room alone, her sitting on my lap, 5 minutes, half an hour, felt like half a year, wrapped in fluid kisses that had no end, was pure platonic bliss. I, not yet pubertal, though she probably was, and so kissing me, was it practice, an experiment, or was she just then as deluged as I, but sooner disenchanted? That was the last time I saw her. A note had thriven, I tried others. Each seemed to make things worse. School ended, we went away for the summer. I sang, sealed with a kiss, accompanied by my transistor. 1,000 times by fall, she'd abandoned words, abandoned propriety for a more earthy life. Squirrel's nest hair, coal black eyes, slovenly clothes, public displays of affection, motorcycles, demotic speech, slipped down a track, rejecting, among other things, all that I valued, everything I was. I've always marveled at how people suddenly choose at 7 or 12, 16 or 25 what they want to be, attach themselves forcefully to a profession, cult, hobby, study, partner, subculture, discipline, fashion, change direction, reject friends and family, build at great cost and effort something apt as this was for her, since it worked. And at our reunion 25 years later, she was still defiantly that same chosen self, and only the defiance gives one pause. She'd resolutely put the might have beens entirely behind. While it seemed back then like only the two, she'd had so many choices, so many attachments she might have formed or fled. Could have been an actress, feminist, thief, nun, goth, addict, novelist, Muslim, forest ranger, any three. Could have moved to Montana, Paris, Brazil. Rebellion can take so many forms. At the time, it did not matter to me, only that she was gone. But now it's the choosing I admire most, the how and why, and wish I could ask and she know, share how much was genes, family, peers, lovers, reading, disappointment, promise, fear, that I look to her perhaps like the little prince or Mr. Magoo, rejection of wealth, education, religion, cynicism, goodness, rejection begetting rejection, acceptance begetting acceptance, something rich and strange, always simmering in the background, so much ruthlessly left behind. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Alan, especially for the different pieces that you read for us. That was just wonderful to hear that in your voice. Thank you so much. At this time, we do have time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question, please go ahead and put that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. We do have a question to start us off. This is for all three authors. This person says, is there a main message you hope audiences receive from your book? And if so, why that message? So maybe we could go in reading order. So Erin, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, so the main idea and main message from my book is that children deserve healthy and loving families, and the best way to go about that is not through institutions and orphanages, but through working with the communities that they're from to place them in either biological family that's healthy or foster like neighbors. So globally, because billions of dollars pour into orphanages every year, it's actually a very harmful model of care for kids. So I'm hoping to start shifting the narrative of like, how do we care for orphaned and abandoned children globally, while doing it in the best and most healthy way possible for both them, but also the communities that they come from.
Yeah, I love that focus on the community aspect, especially of it. I mean, it's so clear and so central to the book, but I think it's a really important thing to highlight. Christina, what about you? Was there a main message to the book?
Well, it's not my story, but if I were Mr. Costa, I would probably say the main message is don't let anybody tell you what you can do or not do if you want to get it done, which he did. Find a way.
Yeah, absolutely. That core, the central core of perseverance for sure. And also then to Alan, is there a main message that you were hoping to communicate with the book?
No, isn't. Poetry sometimes is read as a message.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the problems I think with modern poetry is it tends not to be too accessible. I try to make what I'm writing accessible in the sense that the stories that I'm telling kind of are about people, but each one has its own messages, and often the messages depend upon the person who's reading them. I mean, my goal really was to get down a point of view that I had, or that a person who was viewing this had, as the poem is presented. And so I hope that people get a whole variety of different messages as they read.
Yeah, I think honestly, it's an underrated idea to have a book that doesn't need to have a central message like that. And I think some of the most beautiful writing can be of that type of reading. So, yeah, there's all these like bits and pieces that come together for sure. But another question for all three authors. This person says, what has been the most rewarding part of the writing slash publishing process? Christina, do you want to start us off with this one?
That's easy. Finishing the book. Having written.
Yeah, that post, just closing the last page, so to speak, and just feeling relieved at that point. I can definitely relate to
That's
that. I
right.
think a lot of writers can.
That's right. And I have writer friends in the audience here who are all nodding their heads.
Absolutely. Alan, what about you? Is that also the most rewarding part or something else you want to comment on?
No, for me, the best part is actually the writing. It's actually, with poetry, I find that what she said is true of the nonfiction things I work on. But the poetry was, each of the poems comes by itself. It's often from outside, not from inside. And the actual writing of the poetry, when you're in the midst of it, is very rewarding because you're always learning. It's an oddity. It's what I say about life is that life knows better than you do what you ought to be doing. And the poems know better than I know what I should be thinking and how I should be operating. And so I'm always learning from them.
Yeah, it's definitely a journey rather than the destination kind of situation. Erin, what about you? What has been the most rewarding part of the writing slash publishing process?
To be honest, I'm very much a people person, and I loved interviewing people because I got to sit down. I got to go into a lot of homes in Cambodia, in villages, in different areas, and interview families and kids, and getting to interview experts, even via Zoom, who are all over the world doing this work. I really like human connection and I like people. So I really enjoyed getting to know people from all different backgrounds and ages and cultures. Um, but I think more than anything, I lived in Cambodia for nearly a decade. And I think writing this book for the last 4 years really helped me fall in love with the country in a new way. Because I think sometimes I get so used to being overwhelmed with like the poverty or the injustices and the things that I'm wrestling with, but just getting to meet really incredible people. And as I was writing this book, and people who are doing incredible work, but also just families who love children well and work hard to care for kids, especially children with disabilities. Like that was one of the big things. So I don't know, all in all, this book just made me really fall in love with Cambodia on a new level. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful thing too. It's kind of like you're finding this newfound appreciation through the process of writing for it. So I think that's a wonderful thing. We've got a question. This is specifically for Christina. Can you talk a bit about how you put this memoir for another person together as a writer?
Not easily. It took 3 years because he doesn't use a cell phone, he doesn't use the internet, he doesn't have a laptop. So I spent a lot of time back and forth to Houston. So that was the biggest challenge
Yeah.
to writing the book. And really, I had 150 pages of interviews with him. So I had his voice on my digital recorder. And, I really by the time I started writing the book, his voice was in my head. So when you read, I mean, I don't sound like him, but when I read that, I hear his voice in my head. And this voice of this book is his voice. It's him. And it literally is his voice. And that's really what I wanted to do, was because it's his story. I mean, I told it and I wrote it, but it's his story and it's his voice.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Yeah, I'm so curious about this idea of, I feel like it really speaks to how you've embodied that voice, but to have him in your head like that, I can only imagine is another tier of the experience.
Well, he's a character.
Mm. Yeah, I think we can definitely get a sense for that too. A question for Erin. This person says, I'm really curious about your interview slash field research process. How did you organize all of that?
I would say in a lot of ways I didn't necessarily I cut over 200 pages from this book because it was just like, it was kind of, I didn't fully know going into it how this book would end up looking. But I actually worked for children and families. So I worked in anti-trafficking, and then I worked for children and families from 2016 till now. And so I had already done a ton of research on the topic because I did the communications media. So I did a lot of research pieces leading up to this book. I also went into the field with my coworkers who are like the social workers, and so we would go to the villages on a regular basis. I would meet families, take pictures, do smaller interviews for like our blog, and different material to write reports. So yeah, I already had a lot of these relationships and access. The hard part was I started the book in 2020, and I think we all know how how things went during COVID. So in Cambodia, like I couldn't leave the city. I had to like stay in my neighborhood for several years. So a lot of the interviews with Cambodian families came at the tail end of writing the book, whereas more of the interviews with the experts and creating kind of a structure for my ideas came at the beginning, because those were the people I could Zoom with. Because even though I speak some Khmer, in order to do a really good job on the book, I had to get translators to help me. So we actually went to people's homes, sat with them. I had a translator. So yeah, it was just hopping in a van and going 3 hours away to villages and meeting with people who are willing to meet up. Yeah, and then for most of the experts, it was Zoom calls, but Kathleen and Dale were my main people I interviewed. And Kathleen is the founder of Children and Families, but she hasn't worked for them for a while now. So a lot of it was even going to Kathleen's house and just hanging out with her and sitting. I mean, sometimes they moved to the south of Cambodia, so sometimes I would literally go stay with them in another city, at their home. So, and then we would just work on this for half the day. Yeah, so that's pretty much how I went about it.
Yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned a lot of it maybe was not so organized, but I can only imagine that's such a involved process that has to take so much kind of, at the very least, this mental kind of putting the puzzles together and, fitting them together for the book and everything. So I mean, I'll say it all the time. It's just an amazing thing to see how that comes together into the final product. We've got time for just one more question. This one is for Alan. And the question is, what is your process of writing slash revising a poem?
They're very various. It depends on the poem. Sometimes a poem is in my mind for days before I put anything down on paper. It'll be an idea or a line or that kind of thing. And I won't look at it, but maybe just suddenly when I'm going to sleep or while I'm in the shower or something like that. And then it will kind of grow or other ideas will come in. Other times it'll be something that I know immediately what I want to put down as soon as I have it in mind, and I just go sit down and write. Once things have a first draft down, And sometimes it really is only a stanza and the thing will end up 6. But once the first stanza is down, I'll then go back and revise and revise and revise. And a lot of times that takes a long time to do, but it's usually within the same couple of days. I mean, I may spend hours, but there's kind of a period when it's sort of molten, when it's still soft and you can still manipulate it and it's still part of the same experience. But as time goes by, often it kind of hardens, and then trying to go back and change it is you lose some of the initial enthusiasm. I don't know, the sense of when you go to plays, you see very successful people who have been, famous for years, and sometimes they seem very, I don't know, they've worked too hard at things, and sometimes somebody who's just new and fresh will give you this great feeling of spontaneity, which it's just a totally different experience. And I find that the spontaneity part of poetry is more important than the polish. The polish is important, but it's the secondary part of it. You want emotion still to be there, is what I'm doing. Anyway.
Yeah, I especially love that point about, getting right to it because your initial enthusiasm may fade. I've definitely been guilty of that. So I can definitely see where that sort of line of thinking comes from. But thank you. I just want to say thank you to all three of our authors for being here with us today. It was wonderful to hear all three of you bring your books to life, and it's always great to hear books come to life in the voices of their creators. So thank you to Erin, Cristina, and Alan for being here with us today and sharing these thoughts in the Q&A, as well as the books themselves. Thank you also to everyone in the audience for joining here with us. There's so much positivity in the chat, and it's just wonderful to see. So I also want to mention that you can order the books from the links that I will put just one more time in the chat for you, just so you've got them right there. Please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and let us know that you attended today's event. We'll look forward to hearing from you, but until then, that's it for tonight. So have a great weekend, everybody.